After a grueling day at work, I stepped into the house, already looking forward to a quiet evening. But the moment I closed the door behind me, my wife came rushing into the hallway, her face pale and her movements hurried. Before I could even set down my bag, she blurted out, "We have a very, very big problem. So big I can't even describe it out loud." Her words were sharp, each one hitting like a bullet. Then, without giving me a chance to process, she grabbed her coat and shoes and made for the door. "Wait a minute, what's going on? What problem? Can you explain?" I managed to ask, blocking her path with my voice if not my body. But she barely paused. "I'm going to meet someone important. They'll help solve it," she said, her tone curt and final. And just like that, she was out of the house. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the empty space she had left behind. The door closed with a definitive click, and I was left with more questions than answers. The first thing that hit me was the absurdity of it all. My wife wasn't the type to act so cryptically. We both worked at the same company, albeit in different departments. Her division handled creative strategy, mine operations. Our jobs often intersected, but we always kept things professional, even at home. So what kind of crisis could possibly demand such secrecy and urgency? The lack of explanation was unsettling, and my mind raced with possibilities. I tried to rationalize her behavior as I moved to the kitchen. Maybe it was work-related? Some high-stakes project gone sideways? But why couldn't she just tell me? My wife wasn't one to shy away from sharing her thoughts, and her sudden reticence was jarring. Pouring myself a glass of water, I paced the room, replaying her words. The tone of her voice, the look in her eyes, there was something more to this. Something she wasn't ready to share, at least not with me. Hours passed, and I kept myself occupied. I reorganized my desk, sorted through mail, and even tackled the laundry, but my mind kept circling back to her abrupt departure. Every noise outside the window made me look up, half expecting her to return. When she finally did, it was close to midnight. The sound of her unsteady footsteps and the faint clinking of keys announced her arrival. I opened the door before she could fumble it open. "What happened?" I asked as she stumbled inside. The smell of alcohol was unmistakable. She waved a hand at me, brushing off my concern. "I have a solution," she slurred, her words spilling out in fragments. "To the problem. It's a good solution. You'll like it." Her tone was almost jubilant, but it lacked coherence. When I pressed for details, she simply shook her head and said, "It's a secret. You'll find out tomorrow." I helped her to the bedroom, her steps unsteady and her speech barely legible by then. She collapsed face first onto the bed, her words muffled into the pillow as she muttered something about an important meeting the next day. I sighed, pulling a blanket over her and trying not to let my frustration show. Whatever this was, it clearly mattered to her. But the lack of clarity gnawed at me, and I wasn't the type to ignore things that didn't add up. Leaving her to rest, I sat down in the living room and pulled out my phone. If she wasn't going to tell me, perhaps someone else could. I went through her list of close friends and sent a few casual messages. "Hey, do you know what's going on with her?" Simple, direct, and nonchalant. But one by one, the responses came back the same: "No idea, she didn't say anything to me," and "Sorry, I'm out of the loop." The uniformity of their answers only deepened the mystery. It was as if everyone had collectively decided to keep me in the dark. I set my phone down, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Whatever this was, it wasn't ordinary. And the more I tried to piece it together, the less sense it made. For now, all I could do was wait and see what tomorrow would bring, but the air of intrigue hung heavy around me, refusing to dissipate. The next morning, I was jolted awake by my wife's urgent voice. "Get up. Come on, we need to go. Get dressed, quickly," she commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. Groggy and still half asleep, I asked, "Can you at least tell me what's going on?" She shook her head, already pulling on her jacket. "You'll find out soon enough. "It's a problem of cosmic proportions," she replied cryptically. Rolling my eyes but complying, I got dressed. Whatever this was, she wasn't about to let me stay behind. Once we were in the car, she slid into the driver's seat without hesitation. "I'll drive," she said firmly, and we were off. The streets were quiet at this hour, but her focus was razor-sharp. I tried asking again, "Are you going to tell me what this is about?" She gave a small, knowing smile but remained tight-lipped. "Just wait. You'll see," was all she said. Her demeanor was a mix of excitement and tension, which only made me more curious. I decided to let it go for the moment, knowing she wasn't going to budge. We arrived at a suburban neighborhood, pulling up to the house of one of her close friends. The driveway was packed with cars, and through the windows, I could see a crowd of people. As we stepped inside, it became clear that this wasn't a casual gathering. Nearly everyone from her department, and some from mine, was there. It was a sizable group, and the energy in the room was palpable. Conversations buzzed, and people gestured animatedly. Whatever this meeting was, it was serious. Someone called for attention, and the room quieted down. One of the department leads stood up and began speaking. "We've got a major issue to tackle," they announced. "We want to organize a secret Christmas party. Not the official corporate one, but something exclusive. Something for us." There were murmurs of agreement and a few cheers. I turned to my wife and whispered, This is why you turned last night into a spectacle?" She hushed me, saying, "Just listen." Reluctantly, I kept quiet. The discussion continued, and people began throwing out ideas. Some suggested themes, others talked about activities, and then, out of nowhere, one of the department managers piped up. "How about a swinger party? With, some adult contests." The room erupted into a mix of laughter and awkward coughs. To my disbelief, someone actually wrote it down. I leaned over to my wife again. "You've got to be kidding me," I said under my breath. She gave me a look that said, "Not now." The conversation took a more structured turn as roles were assigned. To my growing dismay, my wife was named one of the key organizers, along with a few others, including the manager who had suggested the outrageous idea. The department head encouraged everyone to mingle and brainstorm, assuring us that this would be the best Christmas event anyone had ever seen. Drinks were brought out, and the room relaxed into a more casual atmosphere, though my irritation only grew. At one point, the same manager approached my wife with an overly familiar grin. "I've got a special task for you," he said, his tone dripping with insinuation. I stepped closer. "What kind of task?" I asked bluntly. He chuckled and waved me off. "Nothing to worry about. She'll know soon enough." Turning back to my wife, he added, "You've got my number. I'll call you later." My patience was wearing thin. "This swinger party idea is insane," I told her as we prepared to leave. "Are you seriously going along with this?" She sighed, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. "I don't like it either," she admitted. "But we need to consider everyone's opinions. I'll do everything I can to steer this in a better direction. For now, let's just go home." Her words did little to ease my concerns, but I decided to hold off for the moment. This was far from over, and I knew I'd need to keep a close eye on how things unfolded. The drive home was quiet, but the tension was palpable. My wife kept her eyes on the road, clearly lost in thought, while I replayed the events of the gathering in my head. As soon as we walked through the door, she headed straight for her phone. Moments later, I could hear her talking to someone, presumably that manager from earlier. The conversation started casually, but it quickly became apparent that it wasn't going to end anytime soon. I busied myself in the kitchen, trying to ignore the muffled tones of her voice drifting from the other room. After nearly an hour, my patience was wearing thin. I walked into the living room and gestured toward her phone. "Wrap it up," I said firmly. She held up a hand, signaling for just a few more minutes. 10 minutes later, she finally ended the call. "What could you possibly have to talk about for that long?" I asked, crossing my arms. She sighed, clearly irritated by my question. It's just organizational stuff, she said. We're meeting tomorrow after work to go over everything in more detail. I wasn't satisfied with her vague response. Details, I pressed. What exactly are you organizing? She shrugged, avoiding my gaze. Honestly, I don't know yet. He has some big ideas, apparently. It's not like him to call me like this, so I'm guessing it's something important. Her nonchalant attitude only added to my frustration. Big ideas? I repeated. Like turning a Christmas party into a swinger event? My sarcasm was sharp, and she didn't take kindly to it. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You're blowing this way out of proportion. She stood up, brushing past me on her way to the bedroom. I followed, unwilling to let the conversation end on that note. I'm not the one making ridiculous suggestions, I retorted. That guy is weird, and you know it. She turned around, clearly fed up. Look, I'm handling it, okay? Just let it go. Her dismissal didn't sit well with me, but I decided to drop it for the night. As she got ready for bed, I thought back to the manager's behavior at the meeting. He was undeniably odd, with his inappropriate jokes and constant innuendos. It wasn't just me who noticed, others at the party seemed uncomfortable, too. Yet here he was, assigning my wife tasks and calling her at all hours. The whole situation felt off. I stayed up for a while, going over the details in my head. It wasn't that I didn't trust my wife, I did, but there was something about this man that set off alarm bells. If it were anyone else, I might have dismissed it as harmless workplace chatter. But his track record spoke for itself, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was heading somewhere I wouldn't like. Eventually, I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept wandering back to that call, the meeting, and the strange dynamic between my wife and her manager. I told myself I was overthinking it, but deep down, I knew better. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends. Whatever this grand idea was, it had better be worth the trouble. The next morning, things were back to normal on the surface. She left for work as usual, and I went about my day. But the unease lingered, a constant reminder that something wasn't right. As much as I wanted to believe that everything would sort itself out, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in the back of my mind. We'd see where this went, but one thing was certain, the story wasn't over yet. And trust me, you won't believe what's coming next. The next day was my day off, and I was looking forward to some peace and quiet. My wife, on the other hand, had to work. I woke up leisurely and made myself a coffee before heading to the bedroom to grab a fresh shirt. That's when I noticed it. Her wardrobe, usually neatly organized, had an empty hanger where her short latex dress used to be. That dress wasn't for regular outings, it was something we kept strictly for private moments. The sight of its absence sent my mind racing. I picked up my phone and called her immediately. Hey, what are you wearing today? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She hesitated for a moment before replying, I'm busy right now. Can we talk later? That response didn't sit well with me. What are you wearing? I repeated, more firmly this time. I'll explain everything later. I have to go, she said, cutting the call short. I stared at my phone, a mix of irritation and suspicion building inside me. Whatever she was doing, she wasn't being forthcoming about it. The rest of the day passed slowly. I tried to distract myself with a series I'd been meaning to catch up on, but my mind kept wandering back to that missing dress. The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. That dress had no business being outside the house, let alone at her workplace. I considered calling her again but decided against it. She'd already brushed me off once, pressing the issue now wouldn't get me anywhere. By the time evening rolled around, I'd worked myself into a quiet simmer. When she finally walked through the door, I was ready. Where's the dress? I asked without preamble. She looked taken aback for a moment before recovering. Oh, that. A friend asked to borrow it, she said casually, as if that explanation should be enough. A friend? I repeated, my voice heavy with skepticism. Who borrows a latex dress for casual errands? She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. It's not a big deal. And what about your day? I pressed. What exactly happened at work? She sighed, clearly irritated by my questions. There's a lot going on, she said vaguely. We're trying to finalize some details for the event. And no, this isn't the first meeting. There'll be more, and I'll probably have to stay late again. Her tone was weary, as if the weight of it all was getting to her. But her answers were too vague for my liking, and the more she spoke, the less satisfied I felt. You're not telling me everything, I said, crossing my arms. Why so many secrets? She shot me a look that was equal parts frustration and exhaustion. Because it's complicated, she replied. I'm doing my best to handle everything, and frankly, I'm tired. Can we not do this right now? Her defensiveness only added to my suspicions, but I decided to back off for the moment. Pushing her too hard wouldn't get me the answers I needed. As she started to unwind for the evening, I couldn't help but feel the tension between us. It wasn't just the missing dress or her cryptic responses. It was the growing distance, the sense that she was slipping into a world I wasn't a part of. Just as I was about to let it go for the night, she turned to me with a strange expression. By the way, she said, almost hesitantly, tomorrow you're going to get a gift from him. Him? I asked, already knowing who she meant. The manager, she clarified. He said it's something special, and I'm supposed to deliver it to you. Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Whatever this special gift was, I had a feeling it wasn't going to put my mind at ease. After a long day at work, I was heading to the break room when I ran into the manager from my wife's department. He greeted me with his usual smirk, the kind that made it hard to tell whether he was being friendly or condescending. Hey, hope you're ready, he said, his tone dripping with insinuation. I've got something special planned for you, but it's not quite ready yet. I nodded politely, muttering a thanks while mentally noting how strange the interaction was. What kind of manager goes out of his way to make cryptic comments to someone's spouse? As I wrapped up my work and prepared to leave, I saw my wife near the main lobby, deep in conversation with the same manager. The two of them stood close, their voices too low for me to catch. I approached them, pretending not to notice the subtle shift in their demeanor when they realized I was there. Hey, I said, inserting myself into the conversation. They both smiled, though hers was more natural than his. Just discussing some event logistics, she explained quickly. It's all pretty routine. She added that her evening plans had changed. I'll be home earlier tonight. It's just a quick meeting with the team. I nodded, though my curiosity was piqued. The manager's grin lingered a second too long, and it didn't sit right with me. As I left, I glanced back to see them parting ways, her walking briskly toward her car while he stood watching for a moment before heading back inside. Later that evening, she came home as promised, earlier than usual. She seemed relaxed but tired, and after exchanging pleasantries, she headed straight for the shower. Can you unpack my bag? She called out from the bathroom. I agreed, more out of habit than enthusiasm, and went to grab her bag. As I opened it, a long, narrow box caught my attention. Alongside it was a folded note with her name written on the outside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the note. What I read stopped me in my tracks. It was a handwritten confession, dripping with intimacy and detailing the sender's desires for my wife in explicit terms. My fists clenched involuntarily as anger coursed through me. What the hell is this? I yelled, holding up the note as she stepped out of the shower, a towel wrapped around her. She froze for a moment, her expression a mix of confusion and alarm. I have no idea who wrote that, she said defensively. It's not from me. Maybe someone slipped it in? I wasn't convinced. Are you seriously expecting me to believe that? I demanded. She sighed, running a hand through her wet hair. Look at the handwriting, she said. It's not his. If you're implying anything about the manager, think again. I examined the note more closely, and she was right, it didn't match his handwriting. She added, "There's a guy leaving our department soon." Maybe this was his idea of going out with a bang? Feeling only slightly reassured, I turned my attention to the box. Inside was a bottle of expensive-looking liquor and another note, this one signed by the manager. A little something to kick off the holiday spirit, it read. While the gesture seemed innocent enough, the context made it feel anything but. I showed it to her, and she rolled her eyes. "He's probably giving these to everyone," she said. "Nothing to get worked up over." Still, the day's events left a bitter taste in my mouth. As she got dressed, she mentioned her plans for the following evening. "I'm meeting with a friend tomorrow," she said casually. "We're going to talk through some things for the event." I nodded, trying to mask my lingering doubts. "Okay," I said, though the uneasy feeling in my gut refused to go away. After finishing work, I drove home, hoping to relax for a bit before dinner. My wife wasn't home yet, which wasn't unusual these days. She had been coming home later than usual, always with some excuse about meetings or preparations for the upcoming Christmas party. I decided to pass the time by catching up on emails and browsing the internet. That's when I noticed her laptop open on the coffee table. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen. What I saw made me pause. The browser history was filled with searches related to 18-plus party ideas. My first reaction was disbelief. Surely, this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. But as I scrolled further, it became clear that these weren't random searches. They were detailed, specific, and recent. My mind raced with questions. Was this related to the party she'd been working on? And if so, why hadn't she mentioned anything about it to me? I decided to confront her as soon as she got home. But when the door finally opened, she wasn't alone. One of her close friends was with her, chatting animatedly as they entered. I bit back my frustration and forced a polite smile. This wasn't the time or place to bring up what I'd found. I wasn't one to air grievances in front of others, and I certainly wasn't about to start now. The two of them made themselves comfortable in the living room, talking and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Their conversation drifted from casual topics to more personal ones. Her friend started talking about her boyfriend, sharing intimate details I would have preferred not to hear. My wife chimed in, casually mentioning how excited she was about the Christmas party. "The program is amazing," she said. "I'm going to come home so tired but so happy." I couldn't hold back any longer. "What exactly is being planned for this party?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Her friend smirked and said, "Oh, you'll find out tomorrow. It's going to be unforgettable." My wife nodded in agreement, adding, "We have the whole night to get everything ready. Don't worry, it'll be worth the wait." Her casual attitude only made me more uneasy. Eventually, her friend left, and I finally had the chance to ask about the browser history. "What's with the searches on your laptop?" I asked directly. She rolled her eyes, brushing it off. "It was nothing," she said. "I came across an article and got curious, that's all. I thought it might give me some ideas for us." Her explanation sounded rehearsed, and I wasn't buying it. "It's strange," I said, "all these late nights and secretive meetings. It feels like you're hiding something." That was the wrong thing to say. She snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "You're always on my case," she said. "I'm trying to organize this party, deal with a million tasks, and now I have to deal with your accusations too. If it's such a problem, I'll just stay home and celebrate with you instead. Would that make you happy?" Her outburst caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Okay," I said. "If that's what you want, we'll stay home. It's better than you being somewhere you don't feel comfortable. I'll make sure it's a perfect day." She calmed down at that, and we both retreated to the bedroom. As we settled into bed, I resolved to focus on making the next day special, even if the events leading up to it left a sour taste in my mouth. The next day, we both left work together, ready to head home and prepare for the evening. Just as we were about to walk out, her manager intercepted us near the exit. "So, everything's still on for the party, right?" he asked, his grin as insufferable as ever. My wife gave a polite but firm reply, "We'll be doing our own thing separately." His grin widened. "That's a shame. You'll miss out on all the fun, but hey, enjoy the gift," he added with a chuckle. I raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. It was another cryptic remark from him that made little sense, but I let it slide for now. The drive home was uneventful, though I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. Once home, we got busy in the kitchen, preparing snacks and setting up for a quiet evening. My wife seemed relaxed, chatting about random things as she opened a bottle of wine. Meanwhile, I decided to finally try the bottle of cognac the manager had given us. Before taking a sip, I took the precaution of swallowing a couple of activated charcoal tablets, a habit I developed to avoid getting too tipsy too quickly. The first glass went down smoothly, but almost immediately, I started feeling strange. My head grew heavy, and a wave of drowsiness washed over me. "I'm feeling a bit off," I told her. She glanced over from where she was tidying up. "Go lie down," she said. "Put on a movie or something. I'll finish up here and join you in a bit." Her suggestion sounded reasonable, and I didn't think much of it at the time. I made my way to the bedroom, planning to rest for just a few minutes. Instead of watching a movie, I barely made it onto the bed before passing out completely. When I woke up, it was to the jarring sound of my phone ringing. Disoriented, I reached for it and saw my colleague's name on the screen. "Hey, where are you?" he asked as soon as I picked up. I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I'm at home." There was a pause before he replied, "Well, your wife is here at the party, and she told everyone you'd be coming later." It took me a moment to process his words. "What party?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The Christmas thing at the office," he said, his tone casual. "It's in full swing. Music, drinks, the whole deal. She said you were on your way." My stomach dropped. She had lied to me, or at the very least, left out a significant part of her plans for the evening. Anger bubbled up inside me, but I kept my voice calm. "Yeah, I'll be there soon," I said, masking my fury. Hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, seething. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and none of them painted a good picture. The wine, the sudden drowsiness, her insistence that I rest, it all seemed too calculated. She had orchestrated this, knowing I'd be out of the picture while she slipped away to the party. My trust felt like it had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. Without wasting another moment, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive to the office was a blur, my thoughts racing with every mile. Questions swirled in my head, each one more damning than the last. What had she been planning? And more importantly, what was I about to walk into? One thing was clear, I wasn't going to sit back and let this slide. Keeping my rage tightly under control, I resolved to act like everything was fine until I got the full story. But inside, I was boiling. I parked the car outside the office building, my heart pounding as I stepped into the quiet night. The muffled sounds of loud music and laughter filtered through the walls as I entered. The building seemed eerily deserted apart from the distant commotion upstairs. Following the noise, I climbed the staircase, each step fueling the anger that had been simmering since I'd woken up. As I reached the top, the sound shifted, the music was still there, but it was punctuated by shouts and the unmistakable chaos of a fight. Pushing open the door, I froze at the sight before me. The scene was nothing short of bizarre. My wife, completely naked, was grappling with another woman in the middle of what appeared to be some sort of makeshift arena. Both were covered in a slick, white substance that glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights. Around them stood several equally undressed men and women, cheering and shouting encouragement. My wife's voice rang out above the din. "I won't let you take the biggest size at this party, it's mine," she yelled, her tone as defiant as her stance. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I was seeing. Instinctively, I reached for my phone and began recording. My initial shock quickly gave way to a grim sense of clarity. This wasn't just some drunken revelry. It was deliberate, orchestrated madness, and everyone involved seemed to be a willing participant. As I continued filming, I recognized several faces, my wife's closest friends, her colleagues, all seemingly as invested in the chaos as she was. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to comprehend. Once I had enough footage, I stepped back into the hallway, unable to watch any longer. My hands trembled as I dialed the numbers of several husbands I knew. These were good men who likely had no idea what their wives were up to tonight. "You need to get down here," I told them, my voice sharp and urgent. "There's something you need to see." The responses ranged from confusion to disbelief, but one by one, they agreed to come. I waited at the entrance for them to arrive, pacing and replaying the scene in my head. When the first car pulled up, I explained the situation as best I could without sounding unhinged. The look on their faces mirrored my own from earlier, a mix of disbelief, anger, and determination. By the time everyone had arrived, we were a small, grim-faced group. Together, we made our way back up the stairs, ready to confront whatever awaited us. The room erupted into chaos the moment we entered. Our shouts cut through the noise as we demanded answers. The men and women who had been spectators moments ago froze in place, their expression shifting from amusement to alarm. My wife and her friends tried to cover themselves, though it was far too late for modesty. The husbands I had called out turned their fury on the men present, fists flying as accusations and curses filled the air. One of the organizers, the manager who had been so smug earlier, stepped forward, hands raised in a feeble attempt to calm the situation. "Let's not overreact," he said, his tone patronizing. Before he could finish, he was met with a swift punch to the face from one of the husbands. The room descended into chaos once more as punches and shouting overtook any semblance of order. The men involved in the event quickly realized they were outnumbered and retreated, leaving the wives to face their furious husbands. We gathered our wives and left the office without another word. The ride home was tense. My wife, still fuming, broke the silence. "You've ruined everything," she spat. "This was supposed to be fun. You're just a boring, miserable man who can't handle a little excitement." Her words were cutting, but I remained silent, my grip on the steering wheel tightening with each accusation. There was no point in responding. Whatever needed to be said would have to wait until morning. When we arrived home, the tension in the air was suffocating. I didn't even let her take her coat off before demanding, "Give me your phone." She froze, her eyes wide with defiance. "No way," she said sharply, clutching her bag. I stepped closer, my voice firm. "I'm not asking, I'm telling you. Hand it over." Instead of complying, she hurled the phone at the ground, the screen cracking on impact. "There," she shouted. "Good luck with that." I picked up the phone, inspecting the damage. To her misfortune, it was her work phone, still functional despite the crack. Realizing her mistake, her demeanor shifted. She began pleading, her voice trembling. "Please, don't look. It's not what you think. I can explain." Tears streamed down her face as she continued, "There's nothing real in there. It's all lies." Her desperation only strengthened my resolve. Ignoring her protests, I unlocked the phone and began scrolling through her messages. The first chat that caught my eye was a group discussion about the Christmas party. My stomach churned as I read through the messages. It wasn't just plans for the event, it was explicit discussions about who would be paired with whom, along with videos of compromising situations involving her friends, her, and the manager. Each message was like a punch to the gut. I moved to her private messages with the manager. The content was damning. Their exchanges were filled with innuendos, explicit plans, and worst of all, evidence of his intentions to incapacitate me. A series of texts outlined his plan to spike my drink with a sedative so my wife could sneak off to the party without raising suspicion. The audacity of it left me shaking with anger. Slamming the phone onto the table, I turned to her. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands covering her face. "You planned this?" I demanded. She shook her head violently, her words coming out in a jumble. No, it wasn't like that. He pushed me into it. I didn't know how to stop it. Her excuses fell on deaf ears. I'd seen enough. There was no justification for what she had done. Without another word, I began gathering her belongings. She followed me around the house, begging me to stop. Please, we can fix this, she cried. It was a mistake, just one mistake. Her pleas only fueled my determination. I threw her things into a suitcase, my movement swift and unrelenting. Her protests turned to anger, but I didn't care. There was no coming back from this. By the time I was done, her suitcase was packed, and I grabbed her coat from the rack. Get out, I said coldly. She stared at me, stunned. You can't be serious, she said. I opened the door, the cold wind and falling snow rushing into the hallway. You have no place here anymore, I said, stepping aside to let her through. When she didn't move, I took her arm and guided her out, setting the suitcase on the porch. The snow fell steadily as she stood there, her tears freezing in the harsh winter air. You'll regret this, she shouted. You're throwing everything away. But her words didn't reach me. I closed the door, locking it behind me. For the first time in hours, the house was silent, save for the faint sound of the wind outside. After everything settled for the moment, I sat down with the evidence I had collected. The videos and messages were damning, and I knew they would be of interest to the other husbands whose wives had been part of this madness. I started by creating a group chat, adding the men I had called to the office earlier. With a steady hand, I uploaded the video clips and screenshots. Here's the proof, I wrote. You'll need this if you decide to move forward with divorces. The responses were immediate: shock, anger, and gratitude. While messages from the group chat poured in, I decided to delve deeper into the phone's contents. Outside, I could hear her knocking on the door, her voice faint through the thick wood. She was crying, begging me to let her in, but I didn't move. Her pleas faded into the background as I focused on the screen in front of me. The more I read, the clearer the entire situation became. Scrolling through her manager's messages, I found a conversation that made me pause. It wasn't about the party itself, but about the aftermath. The manager was panicked, discussing with someone how dangerous it would be if their little club activities were exposed. One line stood out: if the higher-ups find out, we're all fired. This has to stay between us. They even joked about destroying evidence if things got too heated. I took a screenshot of the exchange, my mind already formulating a plan. This wasn't just about what had happened to me, it was about holding everyone accountable. I composed a message to the company's CEO, attaching all the evidence I had gathered. The videos, the chats, the proof of misconduct, I left nothing out. My message was concise and professional, outlining the unacceptable behavior and the risks it posed to the company's reputation. Once I hit send, I sat back and waited. The knocking on the door had stopped, and a heavy silence enveloped the house. My phone buzzed intermittently as the husbands in the group chat discussed their next steps. Most of them were already talking to lawyers, preparing for the inevitable fallout. The sense of solidarity was oddly comforting. I wasn't alone in this mess. An hour later, my phone rang. It was the CEO. His tone was calm but firm as he asked me to confirm the details of what I had sent. I walked him through the evidence, explaining the events of the night and the implications for the company. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "You did the right thing bringing this to my attention. We'll handle it from here." The next morning, I received another call from him. This time, his tone was lighter. "I wanted to let you know," he began, "that we've reviewed everything. Several people will be terminated effective immediately. This behavior is unacceptable, and we won't tolerate it in our organization." Hearing those words felt like a small victory. "Thank you for stepping forward," he continued. "Because of your actions, we're able to clean house and prevent this from happening again. As a gesture of appreciation, we'd like to offer you some paid time off. Take a break, you've earned it." The offer was unexpected, but it felt good to know that my actions had made a difference. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure, at least on this front. The next morning, my phone rang, and I saw her name on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was sharp and filled with venom. "You're the most horrible person I've ever known," she spat. "Do you know how many people lost their jobs because of you? Do you even care?" I didn't hesitate in my reply. "That's exactly what I wanted," I said coldly. "Let them find other places to ruin lives and cheat on their spouses." My words seemed to knock the wind out of her, and she hung up without another word. The call only solidified my next steps. I immediately contacted my lawyer to start divorce proceedings. There was no way back from this, no salvaging what had been irreparably broken. As we discussed the details, I also made arrangements to change all the locks in the house. Knowing her, I was sure she'd try to come back, pleading or scheming her way inside. That wasn't going to happen. By midday, the locksmith had arrived, and the house was secured. The sense of relief was palpable as I watched the old locks come off and the new ones go on. With the house fortified, I turned my attention to her belongings. When I had thrown her out, she had left with nothing but the clothes on her back. Everything else, including her car, was still here. Legally, there was no question about ownership. Both the house and the car were in my name, something I had insisted on when we first married. At the time, it had seemed practical, given her lack of interest in paperwork. I knew what some people might say about my actions. "You're being petty," they'd claim. "You're only keeping her things to hurt her." But that wasn't the case. The fact was, she had shown no regard for our marriage, our home, or the trust we had built. Why should I extend kindness to someone who had so thoroughly betrayed me? Besides, everything was legally mine, and I wasn't about to hand it back to her out of some misplaced sense of mercy. Her car sat in the driveway, a silent reminder of what had been. It was a decent vehicle, well maintained and worth a fair amount. Selling it seemed like the logical next step. After all, I had no use for it, and she wasn't getting it back. I placed an ad online and within a few hours had several interested buyers. By the evening, the car was sold, the keys handed over, and the money safely deposited into my account. My own car, on the other hand, was safely locked away in the garage. I wasn't taking any chances with it. Given her erratic behavior lately, I wouldn't have put it past her to try and take it out of spite. The garage door was reinforced, and I made sure the only keys were in my possession. It was a small but necessary precaution. By the time the day was over, I felt a sense of finality. Her presence had been erased from my life, both physically and legally. The house was mine, the assets were mine, and the path forward was clear. There was no room for her in it anymore. As I locked up for the night, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and peace. The worst was behind me, and I was finally in control of my own life again. The divorce proceedings began as expected, with her coming at me with everything she had. Her accusations were as dramatic as they were baseless. "He's an abuser," she claimed in court. "He threw me out of the house, stole my car, and left me with nothing." She painted herself as the victim, a picture of innocence wronged by a cruel and heartless husband. But I knew the truth, and so did my lawyer. When it was our turn to respond, my lawyer and I didn't even need to say much. We simply presented the evidence, the videos, the messages, the documents. Each piece told the real story. The explicit group chats, the damning footage from the party, and the proof that both the house and the car were legally mine left no room for doubt. Her narrative crumbled under the weight of the truth. She tried to pivot, claiming the videos were taken out of context and the messages were misinterpreted. But the sheer volume of evidence made her argument sound desperate. The court saw through her attempts to twist the facts. Every lie she told only strengthened my case. Watching her squirm under the scrutiny was a bitter but satisfying validation of everything I had endured. At one point, she broke down in tears, accusing me of ruining her life. "He's destroyed everything," she sobbed. "My job, my friends, my future. It was true that many people from her circle had lost their jobs as a result of the scandal, but that was on them, not me. They had chosen their actions, I had merely exposed them. My lawyer calmly reminded the court of this, driving home the point that I wasn't the one who had made those decisions. When the final ruling came, it was clear and decisive. The house, the car, the assets, everything remained mine. She walked away with nothing but her personal belongings, which, frankly, she was lucky to keep. The court didn't just rule in my favor, it vindicated me. Her attempts to play the victim had backfired spectacularly. With no place of her own, she moved in with her mother. From what I'd heard, she was struggling to find a new job, her reputation tarnished by the scandal. I'd be lying if I said I felt sorry for her. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. It wasn't my responsibility to save her from herself. As for me, the end of the divorce marked the beginning of a new chapter. My life was finally free of the chaos and deceit that had plagued it for too long. I could focus on rebuilding, on finding peace, and on moving forward without the weight of her betrayal dragging me down. The clarity was liberating. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it's buried. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about standing up for myself and refusing to let someone else dictate the narrative of my life. That's the real victory, and it's one I'll carry with me as I move forward.